Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. We're going to talk about adding dimension to your shapes and forms and moving away from this notion of kind of flat space, two-dimensional space, okay? We're working all in two dimensions, but we're going to try to give these images as much dimension and distance and space within this given object right here. Okay, now I've just picked out a couple stamps right here that I've been using recently on a couple scenes using alcohol inks on photo paper. And we're going to do the same thing right here, but we're really going to isolate the images so you can see what exactly I'm doing in exercises like this one here. You can see those trees in there and the dimensions those kind of portray with the techniques that I've used. And here's a spring, kind of greenish tinged color scheme. This one, of course, is the more autumn, fall type of color scheme. Okay, now I haven't been working with alcohol inks on photo paper for a long time. I mean, this is probably maybe, I don't know, the second or third time I've done it in those scenes that I just showed you. So I don't really have a really strong grasp on the methodology that I would, I'll probably eventually be using, but I know the concept, and if you know the concept of what we're going after with this type of technique, then you can apply this to whatever type of media you're working in, okay? You can do it in all kinds of different media. I'm not talking about the technique, but I'm talking about the mindset and kind of methodology by which to define or further define space within a given object, okay? And this is reminiscent of something, I don't know, fairly large. Usually I use this boulder in a foreground, but it could be used in the background. But it's, what I'm getting at is it's a fairly larger shape, be it background or foreground, okay? Now these trees right here do represent trees, of a certain distance, certain I don't know, number of yards away from us, 40 yards away, I don't know, whatever. But they are fairly distant, but we can get distance and nuance, spatial nuance within this given space here, okay? Okay, now that being said, one of the things that has occurred to me over time, I really didn't think about this, but a lot of times what people are thinking, because they're coming from a certain type of stamp design. Okay, let's say that this is a tree right here, okay? This is a very two-dimensional depiction of a tree. Let me just draw it a little bit bigger than, the maple pear here, okay? But oftentimes in stamp designs, in the stamping world, things are often shapes, okay? Like that. They're two-dimensional. They're outline designs, right? Okay, now what people have come to do and how to color these types of things, it's simply a matter of going in. Now, a lot of, people might add some nuance to it, but it's usually not too extensively nuanced in terms of values used. So what people like doing is they like filling in. Okay, now this is just a piece of cheap copy paper, so. But a lot of times what people get is that. So you get a lot of comments like, okay, does that paper leave streaks when you're using markers or something like that? And it's because people want these types of fill-in types of coloring marks just completely solid without texture, okay? And that is okay if you want just a completely flat look, okay? It's almost like a cutout of that object right there. In fact, you can almost do that. You can stamp these out on colored pieces of paper and then cut them out, as opposed to stamping everything onto a certain single piece of paper and then filling it in, okay? But that's generally, I think, the aesthetic that people have come to look for in their stamping. I don't know, it just become kind of a public consensus or something like that. All right, but for me, texture is a big part of artwork, okay? I mean, to have something kind of absent of texture is really kind of handicapping kind of the visual range of a given scene or whatnot, okay? Now, there's a certain type of look to this, and it looks great, in certain types of stamping. But I said, like I said, this is more of your outline style of kind of coloring aesthetic right here. It's kind of like a coloring book or something of that sort. A lot of times people give things, a certain nuance, like I said, though, but it's usually a little bit more minimal. Let's see here. Let's go with a little bit of a kind of a warmer green up top or something like that. They might do something of this sort. And then they might kind of add in kind of a darker range around this like that, so that it seems a little bit more three-dimensional, okay? So if you ever do anything like this, or you have just a general card that you've colored in or you've textured it with certain types of hue, and then it's just like if you go around the edge and give it a little bit more of a framing, with a little bit of texture around it, that is also doing something where it's adding a little bit of dimension to what you've done. Okay, but we're just going to take that, and what I'm doing is I'm just taking that a little to, a little bit more of an extreme when we're doing color applications, and in some cases on this photo paper, color removals, okay? In order to get that different type of range within a given space or shape. Okay, so the way I draw stamps is I try to give all of my stamps tons of nuance, texture, different values, and by doing so, it makes the design seem more three-dimensional, okay? And I've seen some other designs out there, and sometimes I don't see the nuance within a given range. So it's a little bit harder to kind of determine where to add things like highlights and shadows if the design doesn't already inherently have it in there, okay? But that being said, people are often coming from this, so they're going to an extreme of, something very kind of broken down and simplistic into a general form of an outline to something that's tonal, okay? So you notice on here, I try to have kind of an absence of any type of outline. You don't see outlines in these trees or anything like that, okay? This is called stippling right here, where you've developed a certain type of lighting scheme and shadow with the use of the amount of condensed dots within a given space, okay? So first of all, when you're looking at a design, look at the shadows within a given space and observe that, okay? It kind of takes a little bit of a mindset, but once you get it, you'll get it. And you can get it very quickly if you know what to look for. And you can kind of get that mindset set. Okay, now on this one right here, I've stamped out a row of those maple pears. And I've done it up here. Okay, now I'm going to show you on one side what people do, okay, quite often when they start off coloring with things like markers, okay? All right, so one of the things I like to do is I like to have a certain type of range, okay? But if they're thinking like this, when they see trees like this, they're often thinking, okay, I'm going to fill this all in just like an outline or something like that, okay? So they'll go about like this. And they're utilizing their good coloring skills, when they're doing this, okay? You're keeping it within the lines and everything like that, okay? But what you have now is it's fairly limited. There is dimension in terms of the value range in here, because you can still see the design, the darker shadow areas, but, the color itself isn't nuanced, okay? But let me show you kind of the difference between this type of coloring right here, and let's try to get a little bit more dimension in these trees. Now, what I've done right here is I've grabbed kind of a range of greens. Actually, let's throw this one into the mix, okay? So this is kind of the progression from light to dark right here, right? Okay, now this is how I do my coloring, okay? Now, like I said, I know what concept I'm working for, and I'll apply that to whatever media I'm working in. But like I said, this is fairly new to me in terms of this medium. Okay, now this is a very light green, okay? See, like that? Now, a lot of people have asked me, this is a little aside, people have asked me, well, when you stamped out your imagery onto the photo paper, did it smear your inks when you went into it with, your alcohol pen? All right? I'm not doing that type of coloring like that, okay? Where it's going to matter if I see a streak of black or something like that within my green. Now, I don't know if you can see it right here, but see, as I go like this, there is a little bit of that green, or black, from my impressions in that ink right there. You can see it's a little darker there, and now it's cleaned off right here. But on something like this, that is simply not going to matter if it streaks a little bit. It's not just completely dissolving this and smearing this all over the place, though. Okay? So that being said, this is stamped in dye-based inks. Okay, that's an aside. All right, so that was done in light green. Okay, now let's take a look and let's see how I utilize my next few colors, okay? This is kind of my base layer. It's giving me a general tone over the entirety of that grouping of images right there, those trees, okay? Now, what I'm going to do in here, do you see in those darker areas, okay, like in the shadows? I'm going to hit those areas for the most part. You can even just draw right over them if you want to, but you'll use those as your cues from which to follow, okay? I mean, you can go in, you can, fill in some more areas, okay? We have some other, tones to go, some other values of green to go still, so. But don't, the darker we go, just use a little bit less coverage as you go, okay? And you can do a little scumbling here and there. That's like doing something like this, okay? Okay, but do you see where I've gone in? Now see, on the design, let's take a look at the black and white design right here. You can see where those lighter areas are on the design up here. Maybe I don't fill all those areas in. So you see this little area here is light, and I've left some of those areas light. So you can see immediately right now that this one spatially has more nuance than this one right here, right? And it's just simply because I didn't fill everything in. This is not hard to do, okay? It's not, I mean, you can put on the brakes by just going like this. Oh my God, I can't stop, you know what I mean? But I completely understand it because most people are coming from this type of coloring right here, where you're used to coloring in the whole thing. And it's no different than like this water down here. See these kind of streaks and striations in the water? And look at this up here. There's some kind of darker areas of blue here and there. It's a little bit streakier. So see, what I've done is I've varied my application of color in each of these zones, or in each of these smaller spaces. There's some darks and lights within those spaces, okay? But when I see a lot of times is people coming from this type of coloring, they'll see this as one big field to fill in uniformly, okay? But you can do that, and that's coloring, but this is coloring for lighting right here. It's just not filling everything in, okay? It just means you've, put on the brakes a little bit, which is really doing less coloring, right? In theory, because you're filling in more space here. So this is less coloring, so it's not like harder to do. It's not like some kind of additional technique. But you do have to get used to it if you're used to filling in entire spaces or seeing things kind of broken down into whole shapes as opposed to seeing something nuanced. It's like if I was to draw a hand or something like that, people might see a hand like, like this, okay? There's a hand right there, okay? Now we're going to color it pink or whatever in there, right? But if you look at my hand next to this, okay, or fist or whatever, see these areas right here, there's darker areas and there's lighter areas, right? Veins and everything, whatever, highlights and so on and so forth. So this is a three-dimensional shape. This is two-dimensional right here. But what our shapes. It's the same thing going on with something like this. This is more dimension. There's light and shadow within that space. So we've created that light and shadow in here by just simply not coloring in everything, especially with the darker tones. Okay, now let's see. We used this color right here. It's a little bit of a warmer green. You can play around with temperatures. Or, I don't know. Maybe I didn't use that one yet. I used these two so far. Okay, so here's the darker one. Let's take a look and see what we do with this one, okay? See this where I'm going in? I'm going into those darker areas. Do you see that? See it? Where those darker areas are? So you have to kind of look and observe, okay? Well, look at that. Isn't it kind of adding a little bit more dimension, okay? Now, it's not blended out, so we're going to do that. That's one of the fun things about photo paper. This ink, alcohol ink, is really laying on the surface really nicely, but it's not really absorbing into the paper, okay? So it allows us to move it around, and it allows us to kind of put it back into solution and blend it in, okay? But look at that. You know, there's little nuances of light and dark within that space. Okay, this one I think is the darkest green. I mean, I have darker greens too, but just the ones that we pulled out. Okay, so let's see this. I'm kind of doing something like this. Okay? And don't look for, a lot of people, they want kind of real definitive areas. I want an outline to know where to put this, okay? Yeah, that's easier to follow, okay? It's like a painting by numbers type of thing. But I've kind of think about the shadows in terms of being, you know, those numbers for the dark, okay? So you see that right there? How much dimension those trees have as opposed to this one. Now, I mean, I could add dimension. This could just be a darker tree right here. It could be at night. So you can go in and add your darker areas to, you know, this kind of mid-tone tree. I mean, I can still bring this one around. This isn't like some kind of mistake, like, oh my God, I've gone too far. Like I said, the blender pen can go back into here, and it can remove ink, all right? But let's take a look at this. Let's concentrate on this one right here. Let's see. Let's bring a little bit of a brown into this design. Okay, I can go into the trunks. One of the things that you might not know about Stampscape stamps is that even in the most subtle areas, okay, when we're talking about dimension, can you see these little areas in here? See these trunks of the tree? See, there's a heavier line of shadow on one side of those branches, and it's light on the other side, okay? So even in the most subtle little areas, it's not just a black line, okay? There's a lighter area and a darker area, okay, on those branches. Don't worry about that, but I'm just saying that's what we're trying to create in our scenes in terms of just the most minute details, okay, that are in your design, so that when you use these Stampscapes designs, you'll benefit from those nuances. But try to take advantage of those too, okay, by, you know, reiterating just what's already on the designs. Okay, now this is a little bit of a, what is this, brownish gray? Sometimes when I'm going on with my trees, just going on, like if the trees are green, it's almost too green if you just use only green. And this is like neon green right here or something like that, don't you think? So I'm going back in and blending in some other colors. I'm going into those darkest of areas right here. I'm going into the mid-tone areas too a little bit. But now, a lot of times when I start doing this, especially because I'm not practiced at these pens, it gets a little blobby looking, okay? Like that is right now. Okay, so what I like to do is after I get to something like this, let's re-observe those lighter areas on these trees. Where are they? They're typically on the top surfaces of things like that, okay? On the tops of the branches, right? So let's go into here and just reiterate. I'm going to flip this around, okay, so you can see it. If I'm drawing like this, you won't be able to see it very easy. Okay, so these are the tops of the trees right here. But then there's also the tops of some of these branches, like right in here. So Let me see. Let me try to zoom in as close as I can here. Okay, now I can use my blender pen, which I probably will do, but I've just gone in with my lightest green. That was the base layer green that I colored over everything to begin with. Okay, so let's see this right here. If I kind of go like this, I don't know if you can tell. Can you tell that that's getting lighter right there? So see, I like going light, then incrementally darker, and then where the dark colors kind of add a little bit too much, I don't know, it looks blobby to me. I don't know, forgive me for that term, but I don't know, it seems to kind of describe the look. I like to go in and blend out that kind of blobby type of area. Okay, now as I'm doing this right here, it's kind of creating a little bit of puddle of alcohol, but do you see where it's kind of removing some of that ink? Look at this down here. See this one? If I go like this, look at it, it's getting lighter and lighter. You can do that with a blender pen, but I'm just doing it with my lighter green. Okay? See that? Look at that. Look at these ones over here. That's lighter than over here, right? I mean, you could leave some of these as is, but I'm just, I'll show you, as an example. Okay, see that right here? It's just kind of bringing out those forms again. If I observe on the design too, I can see where the lighter areas are on the design. It's just not in the darker area. And I stamped out, for the most part, those trees in black dye-based ink. So, it shows up. Now, if I go really dark with that, that super dark green that I used, like this one, if I put that dark green everywhere in there, it would be kind of hard to see the shadows that are inherent in the design. But, you don't have to be, this is not exact, okay? It's not like, I go like this right here, and it's like, oh my god, I made that tree too light. I messed it up. Well, if you did, then just ink it over again, This is not it's not a one-way process, at least in terms of, it might be if we're doing this on like matte cardstock and our paper is absorbing that ink, that is not going to go back in solution, blend out. But it will on here, because those, on photo paper, this is not absorbing, okay? Now, these little highlights and shadows like this is the same type of thing that I do with dye-based inks and whatnot. I just can't remove ink like this on those types of methods like I can with this one. So this one's really like super fun to do, because who can, when can we like remove ink like that? But see this right here? Look at that nuance right there, okay? Here, let's work a little bit right side up so you can kind of really see what's happening in terms of the representational form. Sometimes when I'm doing everything upside down, it's kind of hard to tell. I'll try to keep this pen from covering up what I'm doing here. Okay, kind of see these ones coming around. The light and dark are starting to reveal themselves a little bit more. Okay, but see how it's really blended in like that. And let's take a look and see. This color scheme right here is real similar to this one right here. Okay, see that kind of lighter form up top there? Tops of these trees are lighter up top, darker on the bottom. But see, like here, it's kind of oscillating between light, dark, light, dark, light, dark within that given space. And that's what we have going on right here. See that right there? Oh, it's real similar. This is on trees. This is on kind of more bushes, okay? Now, if these were autumn-colored trees, I would just do, what I'm doing in yellows, oranges, reds, whatever, okay? Okay, now let's go to our blender pen, okay? That was green, but I can get even lighter if I want to. All right, where's my blender pen? Oh, here it is. I already pulled it out. Okay, let's go with the blender pen, all right? This is a Marvy Le Plume permanent pen. It's just an alcohol pen. Shuttle art pens work good too. I like the brush markers though for this kind of removal process. The shuttle art ones are a really cheap brand and they're kind of more fine point. All right. Let me see if I have a blender pen in the shuttle art pens. I don't know if I have a blender pen in the shuttle art range of 88 colors. Okay, let me just stick with this one. Okay, but you can see now some of these areas, like right in here, it's a little bit too solid, that line of darkness, so I just break it up a little bit. I come into it like that. See that right there? It's just kind of dabbing around. Every now and then kind of roll, some of that ink off of your blender. Okay, see that right there? Look at that lighting that's kind of really starting to get revealed. Don't concentrate too much if you're doing something like this on real specifics, okay? It's really about kind of the overall. See that? That's what those trees look like. If you look like this, some of these areas look kind of bizarre, And believe me, mine do too, okay? It's kind of like this amorphic looking, just kind of color thing. But that's what kind of things look like in the distance, You're not going to see like an individual leaf or something like this at this distance, okay? All right, so that is that. Okay, so isn't that a lot more nuanced than this? Okay, now let me show you what to do with this right here. Thinking about dimensions within given objects is a mindset, okay? So, if we're applying darker tones into the, let me get this out of the way. If we're applying darker tones into areas within this space, we're applying them to the darker areas of the stamp, okay? You can see the darker areas of the stamp right here. Or when you make your impressions, okay? They're a little bit more hidden now because we've totally colored that all in. But there's also lighter areas to these trees, right? Right at the treetop, little clusters. You see where there's highlights like that? It goes lighter up here, darker down here, light to dark, light to dark. All right? So I checkerboard my designs between light and dark because if you have variation within a given space, even on an object, this small, just potentially the end result when you stamp at your scene is going to be, it's going to give you a head start to richness, okay? The more information you have on a stamp, okay? If it doesn't, if a design is missing a lot of information, you can add that in, but you're going to have to add it in yourself, okay? So I, personally, when I'm working on my designs, like even a design like this might take a week to draw. I'm not taking 40 hours to draw it, but I'm going back and forth to it because I need to be able to see things like, where those tree trunks are going to be. So oftentimes I start a design, then I leave it, start it, leave it. And then all those little kind of nuanced areas in there, those branches within the given space are drawn in. And when a design is missing that type of information, I mean, it can look okay, but it's up to you as kind of an interpreter of that image to add it in yourself to create that nuance, okay? And you can do that, and you can kind of give dimension to images that don't already have it, okay? I just think it's better if, it's drawn into the design itself so that we don't have to do it. See, these tree trunks down here are lighter on one side, okay? But do you see where those highlights are in there? So that when I go into my design, and here's that design right here, I know where to add that highlight because it's already in the designs themselves, okay? So, okay, that being said, I've created this whole pattern of light and darkness in here, okay? I'm going to show it to you in this rock here right after these trees, but do you see where there's lights and darks in here? So the highlights are not going to be in these darker areas down here, okay? It's going to be in the lighter areas. Here's a lighter area up here, but it also depends on how you've colored it too. If I color this in all with a super dark gray, there's not going to be any lighter areas in there, so you probably wouldn't have some, highlights, or as many highlights, okay? But we've created highlights here, no doubt, in these lighter areas. So let's go in and let's see how we can approach these with some additional highlight forms, okay? So we've given ourselves a big head start here by not having things so kind of, two-dimensional like this. We have lighter areas in here, okay? So let's see here. Okay, now this is just a white paint pen. On the tops of these branches right here, I'll put a cluster of these little dots like that, okay? Because that is where the highlights would be. Now look at that. Look how much more dimension that has than these trees over here, right? I mean, this all took all of like, I don't know, did it take even 5 seconds? I don't know, maybe it took 10 seconds or something like that, right? But see? So all I've done is I've reiterated the lights and darks in here that are inherent in the designs. Darken the darker areas and kind of lighten the areas with that blender pen. I've kind of blended out some of those colors that I've applied on it, but I also didn't color them as dark to begin with, right? Okay, the tops of the trees are lighter to begin with, okay? Now see, some people, they don't see the highlights or where to do them. They have no idea, okay? But that's because a lot of times something has been colored like this or even darker. So there's no kind of lighter area within that green space. Okay, but even let's say this one right here, okay? If I look and I see the shadows down here, then the lighter area is going to be the farthest from that. So you can have kind of a more minimal type of lighting scheme, but this white pen can add that dimension into there, okay? So it's not like, it's not this precarious type of thing. Now look at this tree right here. Doesn't that look a lot more nuanced than this one over here? And where is it? It's not, the highlights are not in these darker areas like in the shadows. Look at my hand right here, okay? Or, I don't know, here, okay? This is, let's look at my hand and this, okay? Now I have studio lighting, so this isn't a great example, but do you see where the bottom side of my hand is darker? And the highlights would be like up here on the top of my hand, right? Because it's lightest. Let's take a look at this candle right here, okay? Darker down here. See the highlight right here? It's because the light is hitting it right here. And it's darker over here again, okay? So where would your highlights be? Here, okay? Now what does that mean? I mean, yeah, when you're saying, I know that can be confusing, but let's look at this again. Here's the darker area down here. Okay? So you're not going to put the highlights down here. You're going to put it on the opposite side. Okay, see that right there? The lighter areas on the tree, like that. Put a few little dots and see what you think, You don't have to inherently know something. Just add a couple dots like that and take a look and say, does that make sense? Now, if you just add a couple dots, sometimes those dots look like, they really stand out. So they look kind of strange, isolated like that. But look at it not in terms of an overall finished area, but look at it in terms of lighting. Okay, now see, doesn't that look like lighting is hitting those areas more? Okay, so here's the one tree without it. Doesn't it look kind of out of place? Especially with this right here, okay? So this is what a lot of people do too. I don't know where to put it, so they just go like this, okay? That's not lighting so much right there. It's texturing, okay? I don't know, maybe having that tree could be, have blossoms on it or something like that. But let me try to repair that a little bit. Okay, let's cluster it a little bit more in the lighter areas. Okay. Okay, now remember what I said about, if we're really talking very subtle nuance, okay? If you look at these designs, let's see if I can get this focused in. Okay, see those trunks in there? Those branches going off like that? If you really kind of want to add extra dimension, if you're observant enough and looking at something like that, okay, then we can add that in to our trees like this, okay? See those trunks right in here? Now, you don't have to actually see them. Sometimes you kind of start losing them a little bit, but let's get that flowing right here, okay? See that right there? So look for kind of designs that have a lot of detail and lighting, and I try to define my lighting through texture, okay, depending on what the object is made out of. So like a tree, I like a little kind of a shimmer to it. But anyways, there's those kind of trunks in here. Some of it's a little bit too light. Let's see right here. Some of those trunks are. Let me see. Let me add a little bit of green to that, See that you can go back in and add more color to it afterwards, too. It's not like a point of no return, okay? It's not like certain types of coloring where once you have it colored, that's it, This is kind of coloring, removing, whatever. Too greeny green in here, then just add some more brown or whatever it might be. Fall foliage is really fun to do because you can use all kinds of different types of colors. But do you see this right here? See, maybe this highlight's a little bit too light, so I can just tone over it a little bit. So it's a little bit of toned down brown right there. See that? It's all white right there, but no, it's going up in that tree. I get the dimension from that white, but it's toned down a little bit because of this brown. Okay? So anyways, you have this kind of nuanced, more dimensional tree structure in here. And that's what's going on right in here too. Okay? I've used different colors here than in this one right here. And I'll show you how to add some pigmenting to this one a little bit here too. But let's take a look at this right here. Let's take a look at this boulder. This is called Boulders with Lichen. It's this design right here. I've stamped it out once and twice over here just to carry that out to the edge of the design. Okay, now here's the thing that a lot of people think about when they're thinking about, rocks, okay? Something like this, rocks, okay? If they're coming from an outline style of coloring, okay? Coloring in like this. I mean, you can use different values of, gray or whatever, brown, whatever colors you want to do your rocks. But there's total fill in of those rocks. Something like that, okay? And maybe someone gives a little bit more nuance, with their coloring. Maybe they go a little bit darker like that, And I think that looks really good, in terms of that style of design, okay? You don't need too much nuance, but there's, a decent amount of dimension to that. Just if the design, though, is tonal like this one, okay? We can just take it to more of an extreme in terms of a three-dimensional statement, okay? So let's go with some variations of gray. Rocks can be any color. Now, like lichen is often very colorful. Okay, it can be reds and oranges and kind of ochres and what did I say oranges? I don't know, all kinds of different colors. Okay, but here's 3 different types of gray. We'll add in a little bit of color to this too. Okay, but cool gray number 1, that's what this one is called. So remember how we kind of went in with this one and gave it a base layer all across the entire amount? So on this one right here, let's do the same thing. This is a really super light gray. It's practically a blender pen, just completely clear, but there is some hue to this one, okay? Okay, that's the first color right there. You can probably barely tell. Okay, here's an example of it just stamped on white piece of, cardstock, okay? See, it's just a very light gray. It's like a neutral kind of base layer. I'm just using this one because that's the gray that I have, okay? Okay, now let's go in. Let's use some of this brownish gray, okay? Now let's go. Ooh, it's a little bit too brownish. I don't want it that brownish, but see what I'm doing though? I know I said I don't want that brownish gray, but it's because I'm doing it though, because I can blend it all in, and it doesn't have to be that end color there, right there. Now this is where, now see, I know where I'm going with this, but this doesn't look good to me. But a lot of times what people do when they're coming from coloring like this, you know exactly where things are going because you're going to end up with a dominant appearance of that application of color, okay? But when it comes to something like this is just all part of the process. It's like a base layer. It's like oil painting or something like that. You're not going to put on like 2 layers or something like that and say, oh my God, that's not how I want it to look. You know that you're going to keep building it up. Now you can do that, like I said, on this. You can see this is like sticky, okay, on photo paper. It allows you to do that. You can do it to an extent on glossy cardstock as well. But if you're doing this in colored pencils on matte paper, or if you're coloring on matte paper, just don't go so extreme. Kind of model things a little bit more as you go along, okay? All right, now here is dark gray. Now just like these branches here, you kind of go with the darker tones, the mid-tones and darker tones in these darker areas, and you just kind of reiterate those darker areas like this, okay? So just look and see where the darker areas are on the design. You can really clearly see it right here, right? Is this dark? No. Is this dark? No. Is it darker up here? Yeah. Right here. Right here. Okay, so just go along like this. I mean, if you go over some rock that was kind of light, and you went over it with a darker tone, that's fine. But just in general, kind of leave things a little bit mottled and varied, okay? I mean, you can change where a shadow is going to be. If you want this rock here to be much darker, then tone it out darker, okay? Maybe there's a shadow kind of on it, or maybe that part is underneath the tree. Who knows? Okay. But see that right there? It's a little bit more nuanced. It's totally ugly right now, I know. But let's bring in some other tones. Here's green, okay? Let's say that there's a little bit of moss on this rock right here, okay? Kind of go into it like this. It's kind of like tinting the whole thing. Now this is a fairly light green, so I'm not worried about going into the darker areas. I mean, I'm really not worried about kind of going into the darker areas with any color, because on this photo paper I can really blend it out. This is Kodak photo paper, but the Epson photo papers and all those different photo papers that I've used, I don't know, they work about the same. They all have kind of that emulsion coating on them. This is a lichen tree rock here. Let's go in with a little bit more. This, ooh, that's really kind of olivey toned. It's called jungle green. Let's put a little bit more of this tone into it, okay? I'm kind of hitting it in some of these little bit darker areas. Maybe that's where some kind of moss or algae have built up on the rock, okay? See, what I'm doing is this. I'm doing that type of thing, okay? It doesn't show up, this really shows up because it's on a black, white piece of paper. On this one right here, it doesn't show up quite as much because there's not as much contrast between that mark and the background colors that I've already laid in there, okay? Okay, let's go in and blend this in again, okay? Let's go back to that lightest of gray that I was using right here to begin with, okay? And then we'll decide if I want to use my blender pen on it or not. Okay. All right, so where are the lighter areas on here? Here, here, tops of these rocks over here. See it right here? This one's lighter right there. So, can you see where those lighter areas are on here? I might have darkened it in a little bit, but, it's still kind of in the same general concept. It's just on the top surfaces of things, okay? On these trees, it was the top surfaces of those kind of branch clusters, okay? Leaf structures. It's the same thing, except on here, it's just on the top sides of those rocks, okay? Okay, so toning in like this. And like I said, see, if I was doing this scene in colored pencils, I would leave those areas lighter, and I would use my darker colored pencils in the darker shadows. If it's dye-based inks, same thing. I would sponge in color in those darker areas. The thing about that's nice about the pens, though, the pens you can get pretty specific with them. When you're sponging on color with dye-based inks, you're kind of going for a little bit more of a general area. You can get kind of specific, depending on what applicator you're using, but these pens are like the most kind of specific types of inks you can use. Because of the fine point nature of these, brush markers or whatever type of marker you're using. Can you see that? I'm kind of removing some of that. Look how light that got right there. But look how dimensional this rock is suddenly becoming. Well, let's just kind of oscillate some of the lights and darks within here. Okay? You don't have to remove, tons of ink. It's kind of really just spreading it around a little bit more so than removing, although it does feel like it is kind of dissolving that ink. It's putting it back into solution. It's kind of pushing it around. It's not like all absorbing into my pen or something like that. But look at that dimension. See that lighting right there now? Look how much dimension there is. So, top sides of some rocks. It's just going like this and kind of drawing into it. Now, you're not going to remove ink if you just, okay, I want this lighter. Nothing happened. You know what I mean? You kind of have to just stay with it. You have to kind of build up a little bit of a kind of a puddle of ink like this, or whatever's in your alcohol is in your blending pen. You kind of have to build it up a little bit. Look at that right there. See how it really removed that? Look how textural this is becoming, which I really like. Okay, I don't want a real smooth look. It wouldn't look as good in, I don't know, I think in nature, to have something void. I'm talking about a real, kind of a more realistic version of nature. I do like, like this type of look right there, too. It's like a coloring book or something like that. There's a certain type of innocence to it and friendliness. But look at that, okay? Doesn't that look like a real kind of nuanced rock or rock cluster? Here it is, kind of on its own. So what have we done? We've reiterated the dark areas, like in here, okay? So there's darkness right here, lighter up top. Darker in here, light right here. Okay, so this it's lighter. You can see that on all these kind of crack areas, right? Where I've done that separation between this rock and the next one. But again, I try to avoid any type of outlines in these designs like that. See this right here? Where that texture meets that, it's darker. And I've darkened in that area right there. But, I don't know. The more I practice with these alcohol inks, I feel like I'm kind of getting the hang of it a little bit more. So this is a good exercise for me, too, in terms of kind of practicing with this. So anyway, let's take a look at these right here, okay? Oh, one of the things I forgot to do. Let's bring in some highlights in this, okay? I think this rock looks pretty good without it, though. But, okay, where this one represents, these dots on here represent kind of shimmering leaves, okay? This could just be some additional texture. Where do you do this? Well, you can see some of these lighter areas, okay? You don't add it to the dark areas. You just kind of add a few little highlights like this to some of these rocks, capturing the light. Like I said, I think it looked pretty good without it. This would look good with some green dots too, or something like that, or peach colored, because, you know, the color of lichen, there's this kind of aged look to it. You know, you see tundra, lichen growing in the tundra or something, and these, you know, some of that lichen, it's a living thing. Some of it's like really old. I think it can grow for like over 100 years, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure, but I thought I read that somewhere on one of those interpretive signs when I was hiking in the Rocky Mountain National Park. But see that right there? I don't have it too much around here because, you know, the rock is fairly dark, but okay. Now that, I don't know if it makes sense to you, but I'm really zoomed in right here. This is what it looks like, kind of at arm's distance. It's just extra highlighting, okay? All right, now, let's have a lot of fun in terms of doing a super simplistic type of process right here, but how effective it can be, okay? We have some white pigment ink right here, and what I'm going to do here is, do you see this kind of lighter areas like that? How it really kind of makes that, I don't know, the whole surface of this scene kind of, I don't know if it shimmers, it glows, okay? I guess the white pen dots are kind of like a shimmer. It makes the scene shimmer. This makes it glow. But do you see how those trees in the background like that, when you tone them out like that, don't they look more distant to you? And it's not because I stamped them out lighter, I just put some white pigment ink over them, okay? So that, these little nuances create distance and space. Darker tones in the shadows, lighter tones up top, and then, with light colored pens, subtlety up there, okay? But let's say this tree is farther off in the distance than these trees, okay? With like a dry application, people blob up their cotton balls, okay? And then I say this on every scene that I do where I use this. Okay, use a dry application. This pad is fairly dry, okay? Because I use mine a ton. A lot of our pads, even if they're 20 years old, if we haven't used them a lot, they're like thick paint that you're going to be blobbing onto your scene. So kind of take it and remove some of the ink first, okay? And get it to where, okay, watch this. I'm just tapping it over the top of this tree so you can see what I'm doing. If I'm going like this, then you can't tell what's happening at all. Okay, well, now watch this right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? I'm not being too gingerly. You cannot even tell that I applied that, you know, well, barely, right? Let's just keep working it like that. See where it's just coming into focus slowly like that? Now look at that control over that, okay? But when people go like that, let me see if I can get enough ink on here. This is what people do when they first start this off. And I completely understand, like I said, because my pads, often when they're new, it's precarious because there's too much ink on here, so it's going blob. So they're doing like this. And they're going, oh my God, I can't do it. And they just give up forever, you know, which kind of baffles me because this is like a really easy technique right here, okay? And it is just so beneficial if you get it down. All you have to do is not do that, okay? But after I did that, look at this now. You know, this is a lot of control. The more taps that it takes to apply a given amount, the more control you have over it. But people are used to getting, you know, that color with one swipe, okay? They're not used to getting, you know, much lighter versions of it or something. So I'm going for a very light version of this application, okay? So let's hit this right here. Look at even just that little amount like that. Doesn't that tree look like it's, you know, the lighting is coming from above? And I mean, that changed that spirit of that tree completely. Okay, now watch this right over here. I'll do it over, you know, a lot of these. I don't like to do it over the whole thing because it's just too much. I like to oscillate it a little bit more. So I put some here, none, some, none, some, okay? But look at these trees like that. Doesn't that look like light is hitting it from above? Now let's say this whole thing is backlit, okay? What I like to do too sometimes is I like to put it down below. Doesn't it look like there's a little bit of haze at the base of the tree like that? Or they're just being backlit by, you know, lighting. But look at that little amount like that. Look at how different that is from this. Here, let's use it on this one now, okay? Okay, look at that right there. Doesn't it look like light is hitting those? Suddenly we've added kind of a three-dimensional aspect because when you do this, you're seeing that there's atmosphere, there's mist, moisture in the air, and it's being illuminated by that sunlight. But look at that. I mean, I barely worked with these trees, but I think these trees look pretty good. I always tell people, you know, don't underestimate the use of this white pigment ink. It can make something that doesn't look so great, it can make it look really good. And if it already looks really good, I think it can make it look great, okay? So there's that. Look at that, lighting hitting those. Don't those look a lot more dimensional now too? But look at this too, right here. You can see it right in here, okay? But that's on kind of a, you know, your distant objects. But let's just say on this rock right here, okay? Let's say this is overlooking a landscape down below or something like that. You know, you can put some of this on here. Look at this. Even in this really close rock to us, look at that dimension that you've given it. And what are we doing now? See? You just take it and you're putting it on the top surfaces of things. Don't go overboard with it, okay? A lot of people just go over and then they tone everything out with this, okay? We didn't use the darker colors everywhere. We didn't use the lighter colors everywhere. That's doing this type of thing, okay? Where you're filling in the whole space. So don't forget about the concept of this. Kind of have it in the lighter areas, okay? So the light is coming from above, right? See, I think that is beautiful. I love the texture that that gives. And there's a little bit too much there. Let me see. See? I can just go on this paper. This is the most forgiving technique too. Look at this. I'm just removing that right there because I added too much. But look at that lighting on that rock right there. That rock, to me, looks a lot more dimensional than that, right? So that's what you can do just by simply varying your lights and darks on there. Look at this. Look at the design, though. There's lights and darks within there. You have to kind of break out, though. It'll take you a little bit of time before you start thinking. You got to start thinking in terms of kind of dimensional space, okay? But the only thing that leads to that is just seeing it. There's darker areas on here. And remember what ugly kind of period, some of these things go through, at least in this type of process right here, okay? With these inks. But I love that you can go in and kind of melt away colors that you've already applied in here. It's one of the most kind of circular types of media surface combinations that you can do. You can I couldn't go in here and just erase all those inks that I've already laid down. I don't think. I would need a lot of blender fluid in my blender pen, but you can, to a large extent remove what you've already done, laid down on these images and, with those colors there. So it's just really fun. But like I said, with your dye-based ink processes, and see, here's these trees in here, the same maple pears right there. But where would you look at different lights and darks in here? Well, darker side of the watermill, right? On my structures, I have made areas darker and then lighter, okay? There's darker areas underneath the eaves, okay? You can see shadows in here. See, this area, the brickwork, is different than this one. I see people do this all the time. They don't understand dimensions when they're drawing designs, so that same value is in the front as in the side. So it looks like this. I don't know. It doesn't look like a three-dimensional object, in terms of that. But now here, see where I've added these little line work down here. This is the subtleties right here. So what you do is you darken in these areas right here. So you put a tone over the whole thing, but then you darken in these areas. It's darker around the edge of the water, right? Okay. And you can see it all over. See, here's some other types of trees up here. I made this tree in the background darker than this tree because I wanted this building to stand out more. So we have this oscillation of dark and light within here too, okay, of trees again. So those are the types of things I'm thinking about in terms of, being a designer. There's nuances up here. So instead of just coloring in this whole area with blue, right? No. If you want to add a little bit more blue, then you add it in these darker areas like that. But see these soft, billowy areas like that? You don't want to go in here with your darker blues or medium tone blues, okay? There's already these things, and these forms like this are just a different form of the things that are going on in this tree line right here. Here's darks and then light, but the textures are different right here because these are leaves, and these are soft, super billowy clouds that are, whatever, 40,000, 30,000 feet above us or something like that, okay? But those same billows like that are repeated here, so you can darken in some areas right in here, but leave some of these top parts a little bit lighter. All right? So those are the types of things that you look for. If you want some cues, on how to do it, there's a ton of different ways you can do this. This whole thing could be a brayered background. You can stamp all these things over it, and then your lighting scheme is kind of already going to be established than doing this, but this is just an example of one way to do it when you're doing color, specific styles of coloring where you're defining the lights and darks and, something like this, okay? That's one way. It's not the way. You can stamp this whole scene on green paper or something like that and just bring out highlights or something, and make it into a Christmas card or something like that. Okay, but anyways, do you see these little areas underneath here's that whole thing with the tonal tree trunks right here. See how it's darker on one side and lighter on the other? And then we have this darker shadows down here. This tree, deciduous tree, in between these evergreen trees are kind of like these trees right here. So you treat the deciduous tree, you can do it in fall colors, spring colors, whatever. It could be an aspen, you know. But see, the reason why I sandwiched it in between these two darker trees is so that that darker tree in the background would define this one without having an outline having to define it. So that's why I've done that right here in this design. This is the tree cluster stamp right here. Okay. Darker areas right along here and right around here, right? Okay, so you'd put all tone over this whole thing, but then your darker tones, you just reiterate it right around here in these shadows. Here's a darker area right here. I've made this hill in the background darker than this one, because if this was the same tone as this tone right here, or little hillside right here, they would blend in with one another, okay? So I've oscillated the darks and lights. Dark, light, dark, light, dark, okay? So that oscillation happens with everywhere. You just have to kind of see it and reiterate it when you do your coloring in terms of creating a lot of variation and light. Don't color in everything like this whole grassy area the same tone of green. Okay? If you want to create kind of additional space, like I said, you could do it all in one color, but it would just kind of flatten it a little bit. Okay, so that is my lesson here on nuanced depth through lighting, okay? It's kind of one of those fundamental differences between a lot of the ways, much of the way that people have come to utilize and think about coloring stamp impressions, okay? And it comes from, there's so many designs out there that are outlines, okay? Where you stamp something out and then you color it in. So what, that comes into play with compositions, you know, and careful stamp positions. You don't want a bunch of outlines crisscrossing each other. So that's why it makes people a little bit gun shy to overlap images like this. But these are tonal images as opposed to outline images. And tonal images that have a lot of depth in them, okay, only have to be reiterated to really push that idea of dimension and space, okay? And darker areas in the shadows, and keeping those areas that are light in the designs lighter to begin with, or if it's in something like photo paper and alcohol inks, you can remove some of that color and make it lighter if you've made it too dark. But I think it kind of adds up to a real kind of dimensional looking object like that. I love those rocks. I love doing rocks in the alcohol inks because I love all of that texture in there and color that you can blend in. Okay, now if you sat through this and you watched this, you saw how kind of, I don't know, I thought it was really ugly looking, you know, the way that, the color was, looking in some of these areas, okay? But you just blend it back out with your, lighter tones that you've already used on there, or your clear blending pen. Okay, so that being said, highlights with your paint or gel pens is good. Here's a green gel pen right here. You can put little gel pen, little kind of details in some areas. It's very subtle, okay, because that green isn't too much lighter or darker than the background, okay? This is just a green gel pen. But let's take a look at it real close, okay? So you can kind of see a little bit, okay? And when you look at it from a distance, it just adds up to kind of an overall richness to it, okay? But the highlights are on the lighter portions of the stamp design light areas, okay? Top surfaces of things, okay? So if I did my fingers like this, okay, it's like lighter up here, darker down here, light, dark, light, dark. Can you see that right there? Light, dark, light, dark, light. Highlights on the light areas, okay? Anyway, that'll be my first of maybe a few of these videos, and where I'll try to get my presentation down a little bit. I'm winging it, folks, in terms of these lessons. Maybe I can do one that's a little bit more concise and, to the point, and not 1 hour long I'm looking at right now. But I wanted to get that kind of the basics down for those that might benefit from something like this, okay? So, yeah, certainly practice with that. Be observant and see the images as opposed to thinking the images, okay? A lot of times when people see a tree, they're just thinking solid green or something like that. But there's all kinds of different nuances in there, in terms of something being a three-dimensional object. Same thing with rocks or something like that, okay? A bottle like this in three-dimensional space, there's shadows and light on it. But if it's drawn kind of as a two-dimensional two-dimensional thing like that, then you can color it in just as is. But if you want to give it a little bit more nuance, it's it's a little bit more tonal like that, and I don't know. There's a shadow down here or whatnot, okay, as opposed to just this flat shape like that, okay? All right. So anyways, thanks for watching, enduring this video and my kind of feeble presentation right here. But I hope that those concepts and whatnot made sense. And I hope it's made it easier for you to kind of see volumes and all those kind of lighting kind of opportunities in which to define those volumes within your spaces and whatnot. Okay? Just don't color everything uniformly, and you're halfway there. Then just defining the lighter areas a little bit more, and then you're really set. Okay, so anyways, thanks for watching again. Thanks for tuning into the channel. As always, if you like this video, I hope you like, share, and subscribe.